Can everyone hear me? Yes, awesome, good. So very good morning to everyone. How's everyone doing today? Okay, so before I start my speech, I would just like to thank my supervisor, Mr. Terence Fong, for helping me to consolidate my thoughts and drafting the script together with me. And now, before I properly actually begin my speech, I'd like to ask the audience a question. What is the difference between Hitler and a sheep? Now, before all of you start protesting, this is not a racist joke. It's a legitimate question I'm asking. So are there any answers to this question? It's okay, I understand. I'm dead on the inside too. The answer is 2 words: herd mentality. The only difference between them is that one cultivates while the other follows it. So what is the first thing that comes to mind when you guys hear the words herd mentality? A herd of sheep, maybe? Well, you are absolutely right. You see, herd mentality is actually very instinctual. It comes about when the fight or flight response is triggered. And in animals, it actually causes them to herd together. It's a sort of protective mechanism of sorts. And their motto in life, really, to make this happen for herd mentality, is really safety in numbers. So it's not very surprising, then, that herd mentality exists in humans as well. After all, no man is an island. So why is it that we, an intelligent species, fall prey to something as instinctual as herd mentality? Well, the answer actually lies in our brain. In our frontal lobe here, bio students, you might be familiar with this. We have in the frontal lobe here called the medial prefrontal cortex. This part, the frontal lobe, this part, controls the decision-making and the social behavior that we have with other fellow human beings. In fact, MIT research done not too long ago actually found out through dozens of scans, they actually found out that this part, the medial prefrontal cortex, is more dominant when people act in groups. And therefore, they came up with the conclusion that it was this part scientifically that contributed to herd mentality. So I understand that to all of you here, talking about herd mentality can be very perplexing. And so to make our lives easier, I would do 2 things. First one is that I'll bring up some real-life examples of herd mentality. And the second one is that I would enlist the help of a gentleman that has way more experience than me in this field. However, in order to properly understand herd mentality, we must all observe its evolution. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will require you to lend me one of your WOKs. I need to borrow your imagination. So now imagine that we are all standing now in this vibrant city. And for context's sake, the name of this city is called Constantinople. We are now standing in a hippodrome, which is something like the Singapore Sports Stadium of sorts. And there is a chariot race that is going on. Now, halfway through this chariot game, somebody decides it's a good idea to stand up and start yelling a string of slanders towards the emperor, who is also present at the games. And this is followed by yells of concurrent. And very anticlimactically and predictably, all hell breaks loose. Ladies and gentlemen, what I have just described to you under a minute was a real event that happened in AD 532. It is called the Nika riots. And the consequences of these riots was that 30,000 people were slain, a treasury, a bathhouse, a senate building, and a church was razed to the ground. Now, allow me to teleport all of you now to the 20th century, whereby we're now standing on a very busy street in Germany, listening to one of the many speeches that Adolf Hitler made. And finally, now let's look at the 21st century, today. You take maybe your friend's phone who is sitting next to you, and you probably would see social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. So what is my point of bringing up all these? The point is that, be it a sports stadium, a political rally, or just simply reading off an article of social media, they all have this overlooked power that can get the masses' opinion to change. And that is herd mentality. So now let me introduce to you this gentleman. His name is Gustave Le Bon. He's the author of a very popular book called The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, that was published in 1895. So in this book, Gustave Le Bon claims that there are 3 factors that contribute to herd mentality. First one, de-individualization and anonymity. The second one is demagogue. And the third one is crowd contention. Le Bon here believes that whoever uses these three factors will be effective in controlling the crowd. So before I go on to the first point, I must give you his definition of what a crowd is. His definition of a crowd is, quote, a gathering of individuals of whatever nationality, profession, sex, or whatever be the chances that have brought them together. So now to the first point, de-individualization and anonymity. Honestly, for me, among all the three factors, this actually makes the most sense. Because when you're in a large group, and I mean large group, I mean like thousands, you are anonymous. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows what you do. And that is also the main reason why the man in the Hippodrome was emboldened to say those words that he said. I'm sure he would not be as foolish if he was standing face to face with the emperor in the throne room. And in fact, it is actually because of this shield of anonymity. That's the reason, because of this shield, therefore historians till today are still unable to identify who this gentleman is. A bit ironic now I mentioned about it. So what the Le Bon here argues that in a crowd, there is a disappearance of a conscious and individualized personality. He attributes this to a manifestation of a solidified identity. So an example of this would be, Manchester United fans wearing the same T-shirt at a soccer event, or in the context of the Nika riots, spectators wearing the colors of the house that they are affiliated with. So the disappearance of a conscious personality, combined with the influence of certain violent emotions, Le Bon here claims that it is a recipe for disaster. Or is it? We'll get back to that later. But first, let me talk about the Nika riots. So in that context, the people, the Roman people, were burdened with heavy taxes and a plethora of domestic issues that the Justinian administration was unable to solve since Justinian donned the purple 5 years ago. The emperor's name is Justinian, by the way. And this mass disillusionment is a very prime example of Le Bon's example of a certain violent emotions. So that is the vinegar to the baking soda. Of all of you chemistry buffs out there, the sodium to water. So now let's go on to the second point, demagogue. Demagogue is actually a mishmash of two Greek words. It comes from the words demos, which means the people, and agagos, which means the leader. So in a nutshell, the people would always follow the leader. Now I have another question to ask the audience. Have you guys ever been mesmerized by the way a political leader speaks? And you always say that, he or she oozes charisma, like this perfect egg yolk right here. Well, that is also an attribute of herd mentality. So here Le Bon argues that people in a crowd, under the influence of a leader, would go into a trance-like state. Here I will quote from his book directly. The activity of the brain being paralyzed in the case of the hypnotized subject, the latter becomes the slave of all the unconscious activities of his spinal cord, which the hypnotizer bends to his will. The conscious personality has vanished, will and discernment are lost. All feelings and thoughts are bent in a direction determined by the hypnotizer. The heterogeneous is swarmed by the homogeneous, and the unconscious obtain the upper hand. Now to the final point, crowd contention. Crowd contention really, in a nutshell, is fads, like pill dieting, or even following the latest fashion trend. So just to give you a better picture about this, let me give you two real-life examples. You might have heard of this. In 2013, there was a man who sold 8 million cans of fresh air in China. And in the roaring 20s, investors were selling their shares like hotcakes during the Wall Street crash. What do they have all in common? Here, Le Bon argues that personal interests are overridden by the collective interest of the crowd, no matter how irrational or violent they can be. So some of you here now may be, mentally wondering, how on earth is all this related to the 21st century, today? Well, my answer is another two words. This, social media. In fact, social media perfectly encapsulate Le Bon's first and third points. Anonymity, usernames in social media, that I think it's quite self-explanatory. And in social media, when we are swarmed with information that mostly conforms to one point of view, we become de-individualized. In fact, in my opinion, social media perpetuates herd mentality. Because we all want to have backing from people. We all want to be reaffirmed that what we're doing is socially and maybe even politically correct. I'll give you an example of this. For example, seeing so many likes on a link in social media and a lot of good comments about it, you feel compelled to agree with it. Regardless if you do this overtly, which is reposting it on your social media feed, or covertly, just simply liking it and moving on. The act of liking for the sake of liking is actually called positive herding. And it's really ironic, its name, because it can do so much harm if left unchecked. I'll give you another example. I love examples. Twitter. It only takes one click to retweet unverified information. And if that information is politically biased and someone decides that it is a good idea to use that as a way to discredit the other party, this creates division and as well as an angry mob. In addition, it also creates a me versus them situation. And we start demonizing the other people who totally disagree with us. And sometimes we millennials love to play on cancel culture just to attack people just because they have different points of views. So this freedom that Twitter gives us, the ability to follow people who agree with our viewpoints, this creates some kind of a little bubble. And sometimes it makes us forget that on the other side of the screen, there's a human being as well. Just like us, they are entitled to their own opinions. So here's another question for the audience to ponder upon. Is herd mentality really such a bad thing? Now, I can hear some of you mentally protesting at me right now, but I would just like to say that it can be used as a force of good as well. I'll give you an example. The Me Too movement. I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with it, whereby people are being united and they encourage the victims of sexual harassment to speak out against their former abusers. Now, let's use that and let's juxtapose it against the Nika riots, right? Both involve some sort of strong emotion, but yet their outcomes are completely different. So now some of you might be saying, let's just get rid of herd mentality. Let's Thanos snap it out of existence. Now hold on, before you grab that infinity gauntlet, let me ask you a series of questions. What are the consequences? And what would a world be like without herd mentality? But most importantly, what are its implementations and consequences? Well, personally, I feel that we will get a super disorganized, chaotic world that runs on what everybody wants to do, basically #YOLO. And frankly, I feel that it's a world that many of us really do not want to see, especially in the realm of politics. Here are just some of many lovely examples about this. Parliament fights. This is from Uganda, this is from Ukraine, and this is from Taiwan. These are all real, by the way. These are not just drawn out from nowhere. So now, on to everyone's favorite word, the conclusion. So I guess the purpose of me being up here today talking about being on this TEDx speech today is not just to talk about herd mentality or to reappraise herd mentality. I just want to stand up here and just to remind everyone that we should never try to be superficial when we are approaching a certain topic. You see, everything is like an onion. There are layers and many more layers to it. There's always new information to be discovered and new perspectives to be looked upon. It really doesn't matter if you're looking at a person, an event, or even a phenomenon like herd mentality. It is always quintessential to unravel the complexity of the situation, as my history teacher loves to say. So, to conclude my conclusion, there is only two courses of actions that I can foresee all of you here doing at the end of this speech. The first one is to take this information with you, with a pinch of salt, please, or sugar, or pepper, or whatever you fancy. Do some research back at home, and come up to your own conclusion. Or you can just follow path number 2, which is much simpler in my opinion, which is to just simply follow the herd. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Am I right? That ends my speech. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.